Thanks very much, Melissa. And of course, Dr. Melissa Lee is our CEO, and she will be moderating the panel, so you'll hear more from her later as well. So good evening, everyone. And I am Grace Wong, Board Chair of the Chinese Canadian Museum, and I'm just delighted to welcome you on behalf of all of us at the museum to this film screening of Exclusion Beyond the Silence. Last year, the Chinese Canadian Museum, the first such museum in Canada, opened to the public on July 1st, 2023. This was a very significant date for Chinese Canadian history. It was the 100th anniversary of the Chinese Exclusion Act. Our opening national exhibition was The Paper Trail, where we are sitting now, which chronicles 400 stories on the devastating impacts of the Chinese Exclusion Act on families across Canada. As such an important piece of history, for Chinese Canadians and for Canada, there were commemorations in other cities of Canada, a special commemoration at the Senate of Canada, and this very special film, Exclusion Beyond the Silence. I'd like to congratulate Justin Poy and Craig Thompson, the producers, Keira Loughran, the director, for the film, and thank them for bringing all of us together to have this screening. Let me just also acknowledge our board members who are here this evening, Dr. Jean Lumb, Justice Randa Wong, Burton Lee, and Guo Ding. And you've met Melissa Lee, our CEO. Welcome also to the special guests. I know that Justin and the film team have invited, and that he and Craig will introduce more fully, but certainly I acknowledge Senator Wu and members of both Chinese consulate, American consulate, and many others. So thank you for joining us, and I know as you, I also look very much forward to this film screening. Thank you. Justin Poy. Let me also say, as I bring Justin up, that I want to acknowledge the generosity of the Poy family as our founding patrons, and we're so honored to have the ground floor gallery as the Poy family gallery. So, Justin.
Great, thank you very much. Thank you. Good evening, everybody, and thank you very much for coming. When Craig, who you'll meet soon, our producer, asked me to get involved in this project, it was it's a project that is actually very personal to my family. During the Exclusion Act, less than 50 Chinese were allowed into Canada, and 4 of those people were my father, my father's sister, my aunt, and my grandparents, and then the law was repealed. So they were allowed to stay. But had they not, they would have gone on to Australia. So this is a film that's, I think that when you watch it, you might see that there's a lot of similarities to your community, whether it's the Chinese community or not. And, you know, we really want to spread this story across the country. And in order to do that, you know, we are looking for support, funders, organizations who want to do screenings, because when you see this, you'll see it's a very important message, one that I certainly never learned about in school. You know, I would like to, first of all, acknowledge Altic Global Immigration, who has helped us and sponsored these screenings from coast to coast. I'd also like to acknowledge ACCT, which is an organization that was very instrumental in working with Senator Wu Pa's office, who I'll introduce later, on the commemoration that was held last year to commemorate the 100th anniversary of the Exclusion Act. And we have ACCT board members here, Daniel, hello, thank you, David, and Sunny, thank you very much for coming here. You guys aren't from Vancouver, so thank you for coming in for the screening. And, you know, I want to also, of course, I hope you all had to grab a bite to eat, because TELUS, thank you very much for sponsoring the reception, the catering tonight. That's always very important to keep people fed. So I would love to introduce now Senator Wu Pa, who many of you would know. He was very instrumental. Like without him, we couldn't have had the commemoration, and also it was his office that allowed us to bring the cameras into the Senate. Senate chamber. You'll see a lot of the footage from that day. So please, Senator, if you come up and say a few words. Thank you.
Thank you, Justin. Good evening, everyone. I am Senator Pao Wu, but there is also Teresa Wu Paul, who is another person who was here early this evening, and she deserves a huge amount of credit also for the film you're about to see tonight and the event that it describes partly. I haven't seen the film, so I'm waiting with bated breath. Let me just start by thanking Grace and Melissa and the museum for putting on this event, and congratulate the museum for the receipt of the Governor General's Award. That's terrific. Big round of applause. I want to congratulate Justin and Craig and others, the team, for putting on this show. I'm sure it's bad luck to give a long speech before a show, especially if I may even show up in a cameo on it, so I'm not going to jinx it. But it was a really special event we had in Ottawa on June the 23rd, 2023, where 200 Chinese Canadians and friends of the Chinese community came to the Senate of Canada to have a remembrance ceremony to mark this sad historical event. And let me tell you why we did it in the Senate of Canada. Of course, I'm a senator, so I could book the room, but there's much more than that. It's because it was the Senate of Canada that made the law possible. We are, as you know from your civics lessons, the last step in making laws laws. And when the bill came to the Senate, everybody was enthusiastic about it. And some of the most repulsive speeches were delivered in the Senate of Canada, and they were delivered by BC senators. Essentially my predecessors, people who said things that effectively meant that I don't deserve to be in that chamber. So I felt in a small way that having a ceremony in the Senate chamber was kind of a cleansing ceremony for the Senate. And I don't know what the footage is, but you might see some elements of how we really tried to have that aura of respect and sensitivity and purging, if you know what I mean. Anyway, I'll turn it back to Justin. Thank you all for coming out. Thank you for supporting what this museum does and what it has to continue to do for years to come, because there's a newspaper clipping on that wall, and there's something, it has words to the effect of, the Chinese will not let the memory of humiliation be forgotten. Let that be the memory of tonight's event. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator. Thank you. So before I introduce our producer, I just want to thank you, Melissa. Like, honestly, you and your team are awesome. Thank you very much, because it was a lot of work to put this together, and thank you very much for all your coordination. Thank you. So I'd like to introduce our producer from Ballin Ran Entertainment, Craig Thompson. Craig.
Thanks very much. We're delighted to be back here at the museum. We were here a couple of occasions filming. Although we're Ontario-based, there's a very strong connection in this film, not just to the content, but to the broadcaster's support. So this film was funded by TELUS, Leah Casimond, who had to leave, but she's seen the film a few times before, so she was here earlier. But we were very happy to have Michelle von Busekam from Knowledge Network. You stand up. Knowledge is a big supporter of this film, and they'll be broadcasting it later this year. Oh. Hi. We also have a very strong representation from the diplomatic corps, from the Chinese. This film would not have been possible shooting in China without the support of the Chinese consulates in Canada, and we're very grateful that the representatives of the consulate in Vancouver are here. If you could stand up, Ms. Hu Baoli and Ms. Li Yiran. Thank you very much. And also from the diplomatic corps from the U.S. consulate, Mr. Joseph Garati is here. Where is he? Can he stand up? Yeah. And it really demonstrates that this is not just a Canadian story. This is a national story. It's a global story. So we're really happy that there are other countries represented here tonight, because we really want to see this film travel, around the world and across Canada. So thank you all for coming to this Vancouver premiere. And it gives me great pleasure to introduce our writer and director of the film to present her thoughts as we watch this film tonight, Keira Loughran. Keira?
Thanks, Craig. I won't be long. I can't tell you how meaningful it is for me to be back here and sharing this film in Vancouver, in this space, with the exhibit still here. I flew in this morning and I got to fly out tonight, but I really wanted to be here in person, and I'm so glad that I am, because I get to be and share space again with so many people that were a really meaningful part of my journey in making this film, because of the inspiration that they gave me through their work and their actions, opening this museum, gathering the community together, encouraging and helping to uncover the stories that we were able to develop and chase through the making of the film. So Melissa, Grace, everybody at the Chinese Canadian Museum, it's a real honor. The film has given me so many gifts. It's where my family is from originally, on both sides, and but not a space where I've spent a lot of time, and so I always feel like I'm coming back to the motherland. There are things that this place holds, that this land holds for the Chinese Canadian community, that you live with every day and that you carry with you, and it's been really strengthening at a time when we started this film in the pandemic to connect with the community across the country, and that's what this film gave to me, was the gift of community. And so it also means a lot to share that back with the community, and that you took the time to come and share in the story together. Following the film, we're going to do a short Q&A, I think, with Melissa moderating, and a few special guests that you will meet in the film who've also joined us today. So I think without further ado, enjoy the film, and thanks again for coming.
I just want to say what an amazing film that all of you have put together. It was so moving, and it's so wonderful to have this kind of reflection of our ancestors and our journey in the Chinese Canadian Museum and on the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people. We're continually on our own journey also to understand the lands of our ancestors here in Canada. And so it feels particularly meaningful to do that on these unceded territories as well. So I think, should I do just a very brief bio intro of all of you? And so very briefly, so Keira, director of the film, grew up in Toronto and directed community theatre musicals, studied theatre at University of Alberta, acted in the Stratford Festival Company and at theatres across Canada. In 2014, directed a Japanese setting of Titus Andronicus in Canadian staged Shakespeare in High Park, and has been nominated for 2 Dora Mayer Moore Awards and has won many awards, including the NNAP Performing Arts Award and a Guthrie from the Stratford Festival. And then we have Helen, who is our surprise panelist tonight, dedicated community leader within the Chinese community and her church, and more recently a passionate voice for residents and families in long-term care. Over 30 years of experience in Ontario Public Resources, and retired early to spend time with her grandmother, Foon Hay Lum, who moved into the long-term care home at the remarkable age of 107. Her contributions were recognized with the Orville Thacker Award from the Ontario Health Coalition, honoring her exceptional commitment to enhancing public health care for seniors in Ontario. And then we have Craig, accomplished media executive with over 25 years in content creation, production, and management, president and executive producer of Ballinran Entertainment, a company he established 30 years ago, and serves on the International Committee for the Canadian Media Producers Association, and has been selected to represent Canada's creative sector on numerous trade missions to South Korea, Japan, Germany, Sweden, Denmark, Netherlands, and China. Justin, did you want to join us up here too? You sure? Okay.
If there's a question, I could take.
Okay.
Chair.
Okay, sounds good. So I think maybe we could just begin more generally with a couple questions and then see if there are any questions from the audience, because that's my favorite part of being a moderator, doing less work and having the audience ask questions, and more thrilling too. Maybe could you speak a little bit about your journey with the film and how it's really changed. Helen, Keira, your idea, did it change anything about your journey of what it means to be Chinese Canadian? So not just Chinese, not just Canadian, but Chinese Canadian.
Yeah, the film for me was originally, Craig brought Foon Hay's story to me, and my first response was the recognition of our common last name, but also a recognition in Helen of the kind of anger that was happening at the time at the injustice of the racism that spiked with the pandemic in the face, and the elders, our female elders that were bearing the brunt of it. And we do talk about the film. I'll let Helen speak. But in terms of, for me, the discovery about Yuan Fen, I'd been researching the exclusion period, but meeting Helen became a personal way into the story that I thought might make the story, or give it not just educational, that it could be artistic and educational and personal. And so in making the film, it was a bit like, okay, how much of myself do I, like trying to tell that journey, it really was a sort of a redefining and a deepening for me of what it meant to be Chinese Canadian. And I often feel a bit, I have a lot of privilege, and so there's sort of a bit of a reconciliation on my part of the privilege that I grew up with and trying to address some of the ignorance that I kind of allowed myself to stay in as a young person in order to share these stories more broadly with our community.
What about you, Helen?
Well, I didn't think that, my Chinese language skills were really any good at all. I thought it was like baby talk, right? Okay, my grandmother can understand me, my mama can understand me, but, nobody else can understand me, right? Should I really teach my son that? Because it's all broken Chinese kind of thing, right? But when I went to China, I was like stunned. There's a whole village. If they're over 70 or 80, they would understand me, because my language was frozen in time. When my grandmother left in the 50s, that's how they spoke. And that's what she passed on to me. And that's how I speak. And then when they heard me speak, they're like, oh my God, she's young, but she speaks like an old person, right? And it's not that great, but still, it's passable. And I was like, oh my God, my language is passable. Somebody understood me that I didn't know, like a total stranger from this village, right?
So you speak Toisanwa, or?
I was raised with my grandmother, so she's Sunway. So it has like a Sunway. But my dad is Toisan. Mm-hmm. And my mother-in-law, she just left. But she said that she noticed when I speak to my mom, it's more Sunway. And then when I speak to my dad, it's more Toisan kind of thing. And you just do it without thinking kind of thing, right? So what I learned there was actually my language is very precious. The little that I have, it is very precious, and it needs to be preserved, and it needs to be shared, and it needs to be encouraged. So shame on me that I didn't pass that on to my son. I mean, he went to French immersion, right? He can speak French, but, and he's learning Mandarin, right? But he can't speak the language that his popo, his bak, his great-grandmother can speak, right? And so now I've gotten this awareness, and I want to tell everybody, whatever little you have, just keep it up and just use it, because when you use it, it'll get better and better, and you'll get more confident. And, before you know it, you're going to be a little bit more fluent, I think. And I was just shocked.
That's really fascinating, and it's also probably amongst some audience members here that those dialects, like Toisan, they actually are still in existence in Chinese diaspora communities like Vancouver, Chinatown, like even probably Sydney, Australia, Chinatown. So they are frozen, but only in the diaspora communities. Craig, I wanted to ask you, what made you, so you brought this story to Keira. Like, what fascinated you about this story?
Well, my wife is Chinese Canadian, and our youngest daughter is half Chinese. And I've been back and forth to China for almost 20 years now. And I've always been fascinated with China as a country. And I'm always on the lookout for really interesting Chinese stories because they're not told enough. And I had just come back from China 6 weeks before the pandemic hit China. And I was just reading the newspaper about Foon Hay Lum, and I started reading down, and her life story was just simply unbelievable. And Keira and I were already, because we're both in Stratford, we're looking at other projects to do together. And I said, look what I found here. I had already contacted Helen to see if I knew the story was worth doing, and my wife said, don't bother because you're never going to get back into China again. And of course she was right. It took us 3.5 years before the world opened up again, and we started this project in May of 2020, and here we are in December of 2024. So I've always been interested in, my background is as a journalist. I've always been interested in telling stories that are untold, and plus my family connection to China as well. So that's sort of how it came to be.
And what was the pivotal moment, like in the story? Did you always knew you needed to go back to China together? Like, it felt very pivotal when you found out that your ancestors' graves were right next to each other. It almost felt like it was happening in real time.
What?
Like,
It was.
can you tell us a little more about that?
A documentary, you have to follow. The documentary leads you. You don't lead the documentary. And as they said in the film, you were really reluctant to go back to China. Your mother said, don't go back. Nobody will know.
Oh, yeah. I was like, I don't know about this, right?
Yeah.
I'd been back. I'd found my way back to the village in 2020 when I went backpacking, and I didn't speak enough. I didn't know. Like, my grandmother got a letter like months later saying, "We hear Keira came by the village. Next time, like, tell her we're coming, or tell us that she's coming." So I didn't have that experience, and my Aunt Arlene had looked up our family relations with the help of a company called My China Roots, which over the course we discovered has actually helped a lot of people track family down and track down villages. And so, but again, our language within our family wasn't strong enough to actually get a response to the contact info that we were given. And so it was actually through Bal and Rand's people that we were able to make contact, and Craig went down to connect and sort of set it up. But we structured it in such a way that when we knew we could go, which was, a whole job in and of itself to get those permissions, we set it up so that we didn't know what was going to happen. We knew who we were going to speak to, but we didn't know what that was. And the graves was just ridiculous. Like, it was very cheap, but in those ways too, it felt the story about those connections and Yuan Fan and the work that we needed to do. That's how it felt pivotal to me. Like, I was like, oh, I guess that's what the film is then. And that was helpful because, we had so much footage. There were so many stories. There were so many gateways into this story. So it became helpful as an organizing principle.
It feels very potent what you just said there, Craig, too. The documentary leads you where it goes. And it was almost like you knew that you set it up so that you wouldn't know, so you'd have that moment, which is very magical in the film. Are there any questions that are from the audience? I might like to open it up in case there are any.
I didn't think about how to formulate this question, but there were English subtitles when people were speaking Chinese languages, but there are no Chinese subtitles when...
There is going to be a Chinese language version of it, but for the purposes of the theatrical premiere, it wasn't translated for people that don't speak English sufficiently, I guess, in terms of its conceit. But the Chinese language version will be airing through Rogers Omni in the new year, and we are hoping to be able to, like, in Mandarin, Cantonese, and English, to make it manageable.
Question, Daniel?
Thanks, that was wonderful. I'm wondering what the most interesting thing that could have been part of the movie that didn't make it in was.
Oh my goodness.
Oh, do you have one? Or do you have one? Go. Talk about
One of the things, you saw bits of it, but you didn't get the story. My papa grew up in Nanaimo, and one of the journeys we went on, it became important to me of the nature of the Chinese community that she grew up in. And so we went to Nanaimo. I had one living relative there still. And so Helen and I had planned to go before we went to China. And your mother-in-law was visiting you, I think, at the time, and when we were talking. And so you found out that Betty grew up and was best friends with my cousin Rosie, who was Bob's sister, and we got the story that we got when Bob and Rosie and Betty and Helen and I all were at her house looking through the family photos, and Betty's story was both fascinating. She came from Shanghai as a child to Nanaimo and Nanaimo's Chinatown and couldn't speak English. And Betty spoke Chinese-ish, but really was, Canadian. It was of that generation. And they've maintained this, Rosie and Betty maintained this 70-year-long relationship that exists to this day, so that when we had Grayson's birthday party and Rosie was there because, she knows all of Betty's family, and we didn't know about that connection at all when we met originally.
Yeah, there are so many connections. Like I said to Craig, this film is really appointed. It's really appointed. It has its own way. And I don't know what else it's going to do, but it's going to do a lot. But there's so many coincidences, right? It's like so many coincidences. Craig, it's like, let's do the Sizzler, right? So I said, well, the oldest person I know is is Yut Fun, my grandmother's niece. So we went to Victoria. And so we shot footage of her for the Sizzler, the teaser, for funding. And then when I get to the village house, that sewing machine is Yut Fun's dad's. Like crazy, right? But it didn't dawn on me at the time, But then I'm like, oh, we're looking at the pictures in the home. Can you imagine? You're looking at this old home and these faded color and black and white pictures, and that's her family, all her milestones, her daughter's wedding, her first grandkid. They're all there in China, like just plastered there for decades, right?
One of the things that we didn't put in the film was very important to me, that was a memorable moment at least, was in Jianmen. I think it was the end of our shoot. We got 10 tables, or 6 tables of 10 people, a complete family reunion. Must have 60 people in this hotel dining room to thank them all for opening up their houses and their arms to us. And that was an amazing, just a really great way of ending off our experience in China.
And they were neighbors. Helen's family, once they moved out of the village, they lived in the same housing development as my relatives, and one of the other aunt that blessed you at the end is from my Majo village. That was,
so they're like waving to each other across the room, right? And they're like,
work together.
It's like,
Yeah, so the film also sort of brought the community together in China and brought families together who didn't know each other before we went there. So it had a power in that way as well.
and then we're showing the film here now, right? So my mother's cousin, he skedaddled back to China, and he was in that village in October, like 1 year after we had gone there to do the shoot, to see those same relatives, like on his side, right? You know, because I showed him the pictures, and he's like, oh. I said, yeah, you should go.
Other questions?
Melissa, I'd like to say something. Maybe I'll just sit here. So, you know, the film is about the Exclusion Act, and it's told through these two stories. And when Craig originally approached me, and I understood what the story was, and especially after I saw it, it made me think of my own family. Actually, my mother's family is from Sunhui, and my father's family is from Tuisan, and I think that when people, you know, even 10 years from now watch this film, hopefully they will see, like, and it'll inspire them to look back at their own family, and because I know so many people from the Chinese Canadian community that have never been back to their village. They know where their family's from. They've never gone back. But this is a great way of teaching kids also about legislation that happened here in Canada, but through a very human example, and hopefully it will inspire all Canadians to look at their own example, and this is why I think the film is so important and why it really needs to be shown to everybody and all Canadians, because it's not just Chinese Canadian history, this is Canadian history. Yeah.
And I think also to say that this film in this moment really stands as that important testament, because what you've done is you filmed two incredible families' journeys, but also the Senate, the 100-year anniversary of the Chinese Exclusion Act, which was done there. And you've also filmed the opening of the Chinese Canadian Museum, all encompassed in this one film. So it's really true that this film will last, and that the fact that it's going to be shown widely is really wonderful. And so that is such a testament to all that you've done in making this film happen.
And on that note, on our website, there's a page now where you can submit a request for community screenings, and we'll share the email address with you, and you can circulate it to the guests.
Yes, I think there's already been requests that of different communities that would love to show it in their community. Yeah.
Can I say one more thing? I just find that it's such a privilege to be here today with all of you. Thank you for coming, and to show it in this space, in the museum. Just like I was walking through Bachelor Alley, oh my goodness. And, the display where, the broken, right? Like, those are the stories that ended, right? And I hope really that this film also kind of brings them out too, in terms of, the sacrifice and the loss because of the legislation, right? Like, families survived, some families survived, but a lot of, like what Christopher said, family trees pruned too soon, right? They're gone, right?
Sure.
So, I hope, and so I find that this is just a wonderful place to be, to show this film, to honor those sacrifices of everyone, the ones that didn't have a voice, the ones that did have a voice. And it's crazy that your family was 4 out of the 50 that were allowed in. Her family was born here. My family had to wait to get here. And thank you, Craig, for pulling it all together.
I want to thank all four of you for bringing this film to Vancouver in our last month of the paper trail as well. So it's such a meaningful way for us to wrap up the exhibition as well as to do the Vancouver premiere of the film. Let's give the